I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me.
My pleasure.
So for people who don't know anything about the sound of the future, can you give us a brief introduction? Quite a hard one to summarize, but how do you summarize it in your words?
Gosh, I mean, I've summarized it in many different ways because it's a completely kaleidoscopic adventure of a film, and I believe that every person that sees it will take away something really different, and I've already seen some evidence of that. You imagine, like my dad watching it, what he would make of it compared to someone who has no idea who I am or who our family are. So that's, yes, I would say kaleidoscopic is a key word to describe it. Fractured, part remembered, part animated, but at the core of it, if you like, what is it about? The sort of roots are a cassette that I recorded with my brother and sister in 1979, when we were in a band together called the Hippies, which is a bit misleading because we were a kind of notionally a post-punk outfit, but we put this cassette together with the encouragement of our mother in 1979, recorded 4 songs, and that's the kind of grow bag from which the film springs. But don't expect a standard rockumentary or even mockumentary or biopic. It's as a film, it's willfully trying to explode the possibilities of how storytelling can happen, and hopefully it's done with charm and wit and velocity.
Amazing summary. So what prompted you to go back and revisit, your past? What did you come across your cassette one day and think, oh, I need to go and make a film about this? Or...
Well, you know what? That's an interesting question, because it's occurred to me that I'm a bit like a self-appointed family archivist of certain aspects of it, and so I'm the one that kind of ended up with the cassette back then, because I was the only one that really gave a toss about it, and I kept it all that time and just thought I need to look after this cassette, as with spoons. I mean, there was some certain things I've held on to, since that time. And then, but the actual where the cassette suddenly sort of became a film was in 2010. Do you remember MySpace?
Mm.
The Hippies had a MySpace page with their 3 songs on it, and then these guys from Switzerland called Luft, an electronica duo, got in touch and said, hey, we love the Hippies, could we do a cover of Dallas City Coast? I thought, yeah, that would be brilliant. Yeah, sure, go for it, here's the track. And they did their cover, and then as they were working on it, I thought, wouldn't it be brilliant to go to Switzerland for a bit of a holiday and film them in their studio doing this cover? And then I thought, maybe here's an idea for a film, is that bands cover the hippie songs and then the hippies reform as they are in their late 40s, early 50s, and do covers of those artists in return. So it would be like a covers project, and you would document that, and that was the first idea for the film, which obviously didn't happen that way. But that's kind of how it all kicked off.
And as you were describing, it's not a conventional approach to a documentary or mockumentary or anything. And you've kind of pieced together a scrapbook, if you like, of, interviews and images. So what inspired you to build it in that way? Did you have other filmmakers in mind, or other things that you've seen, such as from yourself? And what's your process? How do you kind of knit that all together to make something cohesive?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been making films for the best part of 30 years, so it's a kind of Matt Hulse way of making films now. I think you could probably say people are starting to recognize just from a few clips, this is a Matt Hulse joint, because of those elements. So it's something that I've developed over that time, and I think it's probably an important thing to point out that the way I got into filmmaking at art school was from experiments with photography, sound and music, and performance as separate elements. and someone said, you should try film because you could bring them all together. And I said, oh, okay, I'll give it a go. So my first films were sort of attempts to draw image and sound together. So I've never been someone to sit down and write a script and say, I want to tell a story about this. Here's 90 pages of double-spaced text. It's always been from working with materials, quite often physical materials, and in this case of this film, it's the cassette and the Snoopy ragdoll and some photos and instant whip and God knows what, you know, anything I can get my hands on really to help articulate a sort of confusion of ideas. Sorry, I slightly lost track of the original question there.
I was just thinking of your process of how, you know, you like a magpie almost clicking all of these things and then trying to find a cohesive whole to bring them together.
Yeah, well, the cohesive whole is called Nick Curry, and he's the editor. And this is now the third feature we've cut together, so we've got a pretty good act going on there, and a lot of, you know, there's things we don't even need to say where we just know how certain things should fit together. And yeah, I think we're quite a good team because he's constantly worried about what the audience is thinking, and is this a bit too long? Is this a bit too serious? Or Matt, you sound like a bit of an idiot there. Do you know? So I've got this person to balance me, and I'm constantly kind of trying to wind him up and push him. So we have, you know, creative fun while we're editing. So yeah, it's really made in the edit. But I that's when I start a project, I know that there's the editing down the line, and that's going to be where the film is really made. So then that takes the pressure off the shooting in some ways, because you can improvise a lot more, because you know you can come back, review the material, and so that's literally the process in time.
And it plays out kind of like part biography, part social commentary, thinking about like that backdrop of, you know, Thatcher's Britain, and kind of like, you know, the punk kind of resistance, if you like. What was it like to go and revisit that? And how do you think, you know, that plays out today? Thinking of, you know, we're in another very challenging moment politically, not just here in the UK, but thinking what's going on in the US as well. Do you feel like there's added relevance to kind of revisiting that moment in time, and this idea of social justice or through arts and culture kind of playing out our rejection of some of that?
Yeah, no, well, I think you've summarized. I mean, yeah, I totally agree with what you've stated there, and I think, you know, it's kind of like, thanks COVID, because if you imagine there hadn't been the pandemic, you'd have, and this film came out, people go, oh, that's sort of interesting, but so it has attained some other prescience which it didn't initially have because of the situations we're in. Yeah, and I mean, I didn't intend that, but as such, obviously, I didn't intend it to be a pandemic. But you know, I kept true to my the original post-punk spirit of the hippies, and it's just, I just think these things happen in cycles, and it just happens that 1979's come back again, unfortunately, but you know, kind of worse and more ugly. And more and definitely more surreal. Things are really serious, but there isn't that kind of, don't feel like there's that kind of blanket of doom that was around in the UK in the late 70s. People are a bit more resilient perhaps now. Yeah, and it's music, art, young people. That's the, you know, that's how we're going to get through this, I think. And so yes, I knew from the start of the film that I needed to put young people right at the center of the film, because I'm 50 at least, and I can remember things from that time, but I am not that energy myself anymore. That they are the energy. I wanted to, you know, to support and represent them.
And do you hope that that's what people will take away from this film is, you know, although we are in really challenging times, there is this kind of like feeling of hope of the next generation coming through and saying, you know, not accepting the status quo, if you like.
Yeah, I hope so. I think, like I said, people will take away so many different things from this film. What I personally hope is that people recognise that there's a very different way of making films that they may have thought was arty and not for them, but actually is really watchable and fun and inclusive, and that it's okay for things not to have such obvious answers in them or be spoon-fed certain things. It's like, yeah, I really trust my audiences. I find that many makers have a very poor attitude towards their audience, as if they're all a bit stupid or something, and it's just kind of bums on seats. And I just find that really upsetting. And I think audiences are really sophisticated and can do some of the work to complete the story. So, you know, I'm giving them the materials to understand the story, and they're doing the work to make their own story from it. So that's what I would personally would hope as an impact. Yes, and then obviously global survival through young people making bands, but that's maybe a bit harder to pull off.
Okay, well, I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much for sharing all that with me.
Yeah, thanks.
Congratulations on the brilliant film, Matt.
Oh, thanks. Well, thanks.